Ja. Hallo. Als iedereen een plaats gevonden heeft, kunnen we starten met het namiddaggedeelte. Ik hoop dat ondertussen de innerlijke mens ook bevredigd is en dat jullie ook een beetje van de zon op het terras hebben kunnen genieten. Om terug naar de black box weer te keren. Maar het heeft het voordeel van de concentratie, de focus. En het belooft ook nog een boeiende namiddag te worden. Maar deze namiddag zal de focus iets anders liggen. Vanochtend was de focus sterk op het beleid, de politiek. En deze namiddag willen we de focus meer leggen op de markt, de economie en de beïnvloeding van daaruit. Maar zoals deze ochtend gaan we ook deze namiddag de 2 eerste keynote speakers in het Engels laten spreken. En het panel zelf na de koffiepauze zal dan in het Nederlands verlopen. Our first speaker of this afternoon is Sverre Pedersen. And he is an advocacy and campaign manager at Freemuse. Sarah mentioned already Freemuse this morning. He is also a documentary filmmaker and former president of the Norwegian Filmmakers Association and board member of the Federation of European Film Directors. And so he will talk about does artistic autonomy exist. I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm not the campaign and advocacy manager in Freemuse anymore. No, I'm the working chair. I used to be that for 2 years. So my question is, how relevant is the issue whether artistic autonomy exists or not? So I will start read a little from the Norwegian white paper. Art and culture are expressions with community-building power, and culture policy must be based on freedom of expression and tolerance. Culture life and civil society are prerequisites for formation and an enlightened public, and thus an investment in democracy. The culture must be free, with personal commitment and voluntarism as a basis. So, the current world situation is that democracy is being challenged. And internationally we see that freedom of expression, artistic freedom, and the academic freedom of cultural institutions are under pressure. Confidence and belief in democracy is on decline in several places around the globe. As Sarah mentioned, Freemuse had a report, a Europe report, a couple of years ago, called Security, Creativity, Tolerance and Their Coexistence, the New European Agenda on Freedom of Artistic Expression. And the key word in that is that European culture values are being challenged by the rise of populism, the shrinking space for civil society, and the expansion of new unregulated public spaces online, which restricts artistic freedom. Our report and its recommendations are the beginning and decisive and positive action towards addressing challenges to freedom of artistic expression at both European and state levels. The role that artistic expression plays in this context in addressing socially relevant issues as part of vibrant and functioning democracies cannot be underplayed or understated. Art and culture are central to shaping community at the local, regional, and national level, as they represent narratives and conversation that can contribute to a wider feeling of belonging and social cohesion. My experience as an artist and an artist representative, both nationally and internationally, is that we do indeed have discussions in the artist communities both about political and commercial control over the framework conditions for grants, subsidies, purchases, investment, and whether these places unreasonable demands and guidelines on the art that is created and performed. In the Nordic countries, we talk about the arm's length principle, which means that political authorities must keep an arm's length distance from the artistic content. It has been a principle in culture policy in the Nordics for a long time. The arm's length principle is important because the cultural field is an arena for freedom of expression. Cultural policy must not interfere with artistic freedom. There is nevertheless broad agreement that it's legitimate to set political frameworks and set priorities in the cultural field, just as elected bodies otherwise set frameworks for social development in a democracy. In Norway, we have guidelines from authorities which state that the grants must be managed in a way that ensures equal opportunity for both women and men, equality, and that the grants must also be managed so they contribute to ensuring diversity. That grant must be distributed in a way that both ensure ethnic, geographical, age-related, and gender-related diversity. This type of guidance is frequently and firstly discussed, and in particular those who have had privileged positions for the division of grants up to quite recently. Of course, this has mainly been male artists. And they believe that these guidance contravene the arm's length principle. There is thus no talk of artistic autonomy, but of political imperatives determining which artists receive grants. Which means that women, ethnic and sexual minorities, young and old, and with a good geographical spread, has improved over the last 10 years. And it is claimed that thus guidelines cannot be laid down, and at the same time claim that politics and politicians do not interfere in who is awarded grants. But to what extent does this affect the individual artistic autonomy? From a Nordic perspective, I believe that this affects the individual artist's autonomy to a relatively small extent. It clearly contributes to more artists getting the opportunity to receive grants, and thus the opportunity to create and present their art. And it clearly contributes to greater diversity and to men and women having more equal opportunity to get their creative work financed. And then, on the other hand, I can point out that in several European countries, there are blacklists of artists who don't have the correct values and attitudes defined by authorities. And that in other words, you may experience being excluded on political grounds from public subsidy schemes. Thus, we can conclude that political guidelines can weaken artistic autonomy by politicians setting guidelines for who is worthy of receiving public grants, and thus it also have a negative impact on artistic freedom of expression. On the other hand, we can also claim that those who receive public subsidies in open democratic societies experience to a relatively small extent that their artistic autonomy is influenced by the political framework or guidelines set by politicians. Guidelines and expectations from private foundation, broadcasters, publishers, galleries, theaters and concert organizers will have a significantly greater consequence for the artistic autonomy. When the artists have to adapt to the demands and the expectation of grants provider and distributors, galleries, organizer an event, it can quickly lead to self-censorship. And self-censorship is clearly a growing threat to both artistic autonomy and artistic freedom of expression. Even in our relative open and democratic societies, many artists respond that they feel they have to impose restrictions when pitching their project to commercial actors, such as private funds, broadcasters, publishers, galleries, theaters, and concerts organizers. And there is every reason to question whether commercial funding of art weaken artistic autonomy. The second issue is based on ideas that it is an artist you must be able to justify yourself financially in order to legitimize your existence. I have pondered what the organizer puts in these formulations, that an artist must be able to justify himself financially in order to legitimize his existence. The Federation of European Film Directors FERA did the first ever EU-wide study on wages and working conditions for filmmakers and funds audiovisual authors were struggling to make ends meet and to maintain sustainable careers in the period of 2018-19. The survey addressed that members of 57 professional organizations in 26 European countries who are members of the European Federation of Film Directors and the Federation of Screenwriters in Europe, as well as some collective management organizations who are members of the Society of Audiovisual Authors. Some additional professional organizations for other audiovisual authors were also included. The project was conducted by Kudos team from Ghent University. The findings are as following. The profile of a median audiovisual author is 46 years old, has a master's degree, has been working as an author for an average of 16 years. She works 45 hours per week, and 80% of their income is generated through their work as an audiovisual author. She earns around 19,000 euros after tax per year from work as an audiovisual author. Including all sources of personal income, she earns a total of 25,000 euros after tax. 85% of the authors work freelance, and 36% of the visual authors are female, 64% are male. The result of the survey is therefore that an industry that employs more than 1.2 million Europeans with a turnover of more than 107.3 billion euros has an average salary level that is far below the average salary in the countries in Europe. I refer to this survey to emphasize that people do not primarily choose to work in artistic profession because they expect to earn a lot of money. Maybe they dream of commercial success and a high income, but realistically they know that you don't get rich from working with art. And thus I believe that it's not true that as an artist you must be able to justify yourself financially in order to legitimize your existence. The survey therefore showed that the average age of a screenwriter or director was 46 years old, had a master's degree, which means that you had 4, 5, 6 years of education in the field you are working, and had worked in the audiovisual industry for an average of 16 years. So you actually continue with your artistic work even if the salary is low, simply bad. Our regular artist surveys in Norway shows a similar picture. Artists earn significantly less than other professional groups. And when in addition many artists are educated at master level, other professional groups with master degree earn at least 40 to 100% more than the artists. I believe that I can claim with weight that it's not good income that is the most important motivation for young people to choose an artistic career, and even less that they choose to remain in their work year after year, even if they earn very little. The one can, of course, add that those who make their decision about what to be made, who are often broadcasters, producers, distributors, publishers, concert organizers, theater managers, and gallerists, both have significantly higher salaries and largely make their decision based on commercial calculations. And again, of course, this has a great impact on the framework condition for the artist, who are dependent on those bodies and their decisions, that largely affect artistic autonomy, because it's often work for hire that is a premise for being able to practice their profession. But that does not mean that you as an artist must be able to justify yourself financially in order to legitimize your existence. As an artist, you live in a gap between stock exchange and cathedral. And especially in small language communities, as is the case in many or European nations, artists are largely dependent on public subsidies in order to derive the majority of their income from artistic work. This is partly because the market we work in are small, and we will therefore not be possible to create, perform, and distribute the art only on market terms, and partly because the gatekeepers, again the broadcaster, producer, distributors, etc., are not willing to invest in art they believe is not profitable. But at the same time, a great many artists are also dependent on the commercial, and without this cooperation between public grants and commercial investment or work for hire, the artist population in Europe would be significantly smaller than it is today. If we look at visual artists, they are consistently the art form with the lowest average income in most countries in Europe. There are actually many artists who are not willing to make compromises in their art in order to make it more commercial. They choose to live with very low income and rather take non-artistic work alongside art production than create art on investors' terms. In Norway, the survey also shows that many artists are actually dependent on their spouse's income in order to continue as artists. The third question is based on ideas that one must be able to justify oneself as an artist in order to have the right to recognition. I find the formulation to be exciting, but also problematic. Because what gives an artist recognition today? In my field, audiovisual production, it's largely commercial success that brings recognition, attention, and fame. Then, of course, there are exceptions who receive recognition for their high artistic quality, even if they do not experience commercial success. But they make it up as a very small minority. As an artist representative since 1991, I have been able to closely follow the artist population in Norway, but also in Europe and internationally. And we clearly see a greater degree of turnover among artists than among other professional groups. But at the same time, there is astonishing ability to stay on creative art among artists, despite poor pay and demanding work conditions. Many artists find their niche with a small and limited but dedicated audience and align themselves in relation to this reality. I would like to end with a poem by a Norwegian poet, Andre Bjerke. It's the artist's name, and I'm only reading part of the poem. And the poem is, of course, about art. Is art useful? Can it promote the nation's life in any sense? An authoritative voice immediately answers, a baritone of nutritional wisdom. Does art do any good, you ask me? Which follows the broad commercial path? The answer will be a decided no. To a greater degree than reasonable people realize, are the artists the people necessary sensory organs? If art was taken from people, it became like robbing its eyes and its ears, its skin, its nose and palate. The sculptor that imposes form on formless mass is active in the child playing with sand in a box. Take the artist's gaze from a child. Take the joy of form from it, and behold, he will thread on his hoard and will throw his spade. And behold, it will forget its desire and pass into shadow. And bridges and cities and ships will never be built. Drive the artist out, you will thereby drive away all play. And if you lose the ability to play, then you lose your life. More useful than all the sensible uses of death is the form that feels, is the image that sees, is the tone that's listened. Thank you very much.